Hi there, I'm Brittany from By Brittany Goldwyn. I post videos about plants and projects, and today we are going to be talking about one of my favorite houseplants, the Marble Queen pothos. I am deep into early spring gardening here in Maryland Zone 7A. However, I'm kind of in a lull between outdoor gardening tasks, so I figured it would be a good time to talk about one of my favorite houseplants, the Marble Queen pothos plant. I've highlighted a couple of my Marble Queens in the past in some of my houseplant videos. Today it is all about my Marble Queens, and this is just one of them, my smallest Marble Queen. So we're going to talk about how I keep them happy and healthy, the light they need, the water, all that good stuff, how I trail them on the walls, and how to propagate them. So a Marble Queen pothos is an epipremnum type plant. So generally epipremnum plants, especially if they're not variegated, have very, very flexible lighting conditions. I have grown a all green epipremnum pothos, jade pothos, that's what some people call it. I have grown one in water only, under only fluorescent lights, in an office cubicle that had no windows. So the Marble Queen pothos is a little bit different, a little bit needier with its lighting requirements since it is a variegated plant. And that variegation in the plant, that means that the parts of the plant that are variegated, so a lighter color, they lack the chlorophyll needed for the plant to photosynthesize. So generally, in practical terms, what that's going to mean is that the variegated types of plants are going to need a little bit more light than the non-variegated types of pothos plants. That said, I have found Marble Queen to be surprisingly flexible with its lighting. You can see this one here still has pretty excellent variegation, and I have this in our little dining area in our kitchen, and as you can see around it, there are no windows anywhere close to it. The closest are the sunroom windows all the way over here, and a lot of the time I keep this door closed anyway because I work in there. So this has maintained some pretty excellent variegation, even in what I would call medium light levels here. Now, I say medium light levels because we generally do have some sort of artificial lighting on here in the dining room and the kitchen, and pothos plants do respond very well to artificial lighting. Now, these are not grow lights, these are just regular artificial lights, but I do think that they've been helping the plant along a little bit in maintaining that variegation. Let's compare the Marble Queen pothos I just showed you guys in the medium light levels to one that is in slightly higher light levels. So I have this one in my sunroom, which is the brightest room in the house by far. And this one definitely shows some higher contrast variegation toward the ends of the stems. So if you look at this one, you can see what a difference that makes in the light levels. The bright indirect light is going to lead to the most striking variegation. Now, I have not always had this plant in such high light levels. I did have it in a more medium light level environment before, and you can see on some of that older growth, the variegation is there, but it's not as striking as it is when the plant is getting those higher light levels. Now, I should also note that a lot of bright indirect light is what you want to shoot for your Marble Queen, but you don't want to have too much direct sunlight. You can and will burn the plant's foliage. I have burned Marble Queen pothos, having them either too close to a grow light, or specifically when I take my plants outside for the spring and summer to really soak up this Maryland heat and humidity we have, I put them in too sunny of a spot, and that will burn the leaves. I'll throw up a picture of what it looks like when the leaves are burned. This is from when I threw one on my sunny front porch. It only gets morning light, so I thought that that would be enough not to burn the plant. It scorched it, so I had to trim those off and then move it to a lower area of light so that it could produce newer, healthier growth. Now, I have all of my pothos in a very chunky houseplant soil mix. Sometimes I will lighten up a houseplant soil mix by adding in some extra bark. You can see little chips of bark in here, or maybe some perlite, but generally any soil mix right out of the bag that's marked for houseplants or indoor plants is going to be perfect for your pothos plant. And that's because pothos plants need really great drainage so that the roots get the moisture that they need when you water the plant, and then all of the excess water will drain out of the pot's drainage holes. This is critical. You do not want your pothos roots to be sitting in water and too much moisture in soil that is too dense, because they won't be able to get the oxygen they need to grow big, healthy new foliage, and they will probably slowly rot and die. To water my pothos plants, I like to carry them over to the sink and then give them what is essentially a nice little plant shower. So I like doing this because it also enables me to rinse off all of the plant's foliage so that I can clean off any dust. I don't like using any sort of artificial leaf shine products. And it also allows me to rinse off the beginnings of any potential pests that could be moving in, maybe hiding in these areas under the leaves. And it thoroughly soaks the soil, allowing the soil to get completely saturated and drain out all of the excess water from the pot's drainage holes. So I will not put the plant back until all of this excess water has drained from the drainage holes, and I'm sure that the soil is thoroughly soaked. So one of the most common things that I see people ask about their Marble Queen pothos plants and pothos plants in general are, why are the leaves on my plant turning yellow? So there are a bajillion different reasons that your plant's leaves could be turning yellow, but I find that the overwhelming majority of them are related to watering. So yellowing leaves can be a sign of overwatering your plant and underwatering your plant, which is kind of confusing, but I'm going to walk you through some initial troubleshooting things that you can take a look at to figure out which might be the culprit for your plant. I generally find that if your yellowing leaves are somewhere along a mature part of the stem or closer to the bottom of the stem, it's likely more a result of overwatering than underwatering. And overwatering could also mean that the soil your plant is in is too dense. Now, of course, if you find that your plant's soil is remaining consistently wet and you're not letting it dry out at least about halfway, I say as a general rule of thumb, then it's probably overwatering. Now, if your plant seems to be killing off its oldest leaves up near the soil line, and the soil has been pretty dry, you've been going a long time between waterings, it's probably underwatering. And I find that is because the plant will start killing off its oldest growth, which is the growth on the stems up near the soil line. When it is going into survival mode, it doesn't have enough water to keep the plant alive, so it just starts killing off those older leaves first. So take a look at both of those things if you're having yellowing leaves to see if you can figure out which one it might be. Now, as far as temperature and humidity needs go, remember that pothos plants are from tropical environments. So think warm and humid for the best growing conditions for your plant. That said, I am lazy. I do not use humidifiers for any of my plants anywhere in the house, and they do just fine. So they're very, very adaptable plants. They're definitely not cold or frost hardy though. I find that their growth slows significantly in the winter when the temperatures in my house drop down to like 67 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees, just depending on the day and how we're running the heat. Now, I like to take a lot of my plants outside in shaded spots for the summer because it gets super duper hot and super humid here in Maryland Zone 7A for several months out of the year. And I find it's a really nice vacation for a lot of my tropical plants to put them in the conditions that they like the most. I'm going to show you the difference on one of my Marble Queens here that I took down from hanging to illustrate what the difference is in growth when it's in ideal conditions versus when it's not. So you can see how thick this stem is right here. You can see when you get up to here, the stem starts to get a little bit thinner, right? You see the difference there. It's highly variegated, thick stem up here. And then you can see where I trimmed the plant to cut off some leggy growth, and then the thinner area grows down here. Now it's kind of hard to tell, but the leaves on the area with the thicker growth also have that really, really great high contrast variegation, and they're also much larger. Once you get down into this area where I clipped, not only is the stem thinner, but the leaves have less variegation. They're still beautiful, don't get me wrong, but they're smaller and they have that less striking variegation. So this thicker stem with all of these super highly variegated, larger leaves, these are all from when the plant was outside growing in ideal growing conditions. So that's really, really warm, super high humidity, and in a super bright shaded spot. That really illustrates what I mean between the difference between a plant that is thriving and a plant that is doing well as a house plant. Now, this is just something that as a plant owner, I accept my home in suburban Maryland is not a tropical paradise, but I like to be able to get plants that will enjoy going outside for the summer to take advantage of our weather here so that I can see the difference between the growth. And then if the growth is too bad over the winter, I'll just clip it off and let the plant regrow. Now, one of the things I want to touch on briefly in this video is the difference between Snow Queen pothos and Marble Queen pothos. Now, spoiler alert, I don't think that there is a difference between Snow Queen and Marble Queen pothos plants. I used to, and I have a plant that was sold to me as a Snow Queen pothos plant. However, the more I've learned about the plants over the years, the more I am convinced that a Snow Queen pothos is just a very, very highly variegated Marble Queen pothos. I have shown you the differences in variegation even on single plants, single Marble Queen pothos plants when they are in different conditions. And I'll show you another example of that right now to illustrate why I think that a Snow Queen pothos is just a highly variegated Marble Queen pothos. Now, this is the plant that many, many years ago was sold to me as a Snow Queen pothos plant. And if you look on some of the oldest variegated leaves, you can see that the variegation on these is super, super bright white, right? It's not necessarily the yellowish, creamyish color you see on some of these leaves. Now, all of these older leaves used to have that same bright white variegation. And I will throw up a couple pictures to show you what I mean, what this plant looked like when I first got it. Now, over the years, the colors have changed a little bit on this plant so that it's more of an overall creamy variegation, a more yellowish creamy variegation than a white variegation. Now, I also took cuttings from this plant to propagate. These cuttings have been rooting. They were rooting for a while on a windowsill, and then I put them into this soil mixture. Now, you can see that I have this in probably the highest light out of all of my Marble Queen pothos plants. The older growth is the same as the mother plant, right? It's this creamyish, mintish variegation. However, the newer growth that is coming out is shockingly white. Look how white this growth is. So this tells me that I took these cuttings from the same plant, it had this variegation, and then I moved the cuttings to a much higher light situation, and the new growth is coming out just super highly variegated and very, very white. So it's looking again like what people refer to as a Snow Queen. Now, if someone out there can prove that Snow Queen is an actual type of pothos and it's not just a highly variegated Marble Queen, please let me know, cite the sources, because I have not been able to find anything over the years that's more than just like someone claiming they're different on a Reddit forum or someone swearing that they're different on a houseplant Facebook group. I would love to see the sources if you have them, because I love knowing more about the different types of varieties of plants that I have. And since I mentioned chopping and propping to create that smaller Marble Queen that I just showed you, I want to talk a little bit about propagating Marble Queen pothos, because I have propagated more than I know what to do with when it comes to pothos plants, because I'm constantly trimming them to make them bushier and fuller looking. And what I do when I trim down my leggy growth on my plants is if the growth is healthy, I will root it and create new plants. So what I like to do with pothos plants is root them in water. I have a bunch of Marble Queen cuttings rooting in this test tube propagation vase station thingy that I made here. You really don't need anything fancy though. All you need is some sort of vessel that contains water, and you can stick your cuttings in here. Now, when you take your cuttings to propagate, unlike some other types of houseplants, pothos plants will not root along the stem. So if you were to just take this right here and cut right here, that would not root. It's just the leaf. You need part of the stem, but you also need some sort of growth point. So right here shows you what I mean by a growth point. So what I did was I cut this off. It had another leaf coming off right here. I removed that leaf, and then this is serving as the growth point for the plant. So once these roots get a couple inches long in water, I will pot them up in like a little group in soil, and then keep them evenly moist for I don't know, a couple of weeks until I feel like the plant has started to root, and then I will back off and start watering the plant the normal levels. Now you can skip water rooting completely. I like water rooting because I like to watch the little roots develop, and I think they look really pretty while they're rooting in water, like a little vase of cut flowers. You can also root in things like leca, clay balls, or a moss and perlite mixture. I just find that pothos plants are so easy to root that I just throw them in a glass jar, and when they have some roots, I cobble them together in a little cup of soil and let it go from there. And here's another practical example of where I would cut to take a propagation. So I'm looking at the back of this stem, and I would generally recommend not having more than 2 or 3 leaves in a single cutting that you're rooting, just because you don't want the cutting to be putting all of its energy toward keeping the foliage looking healthy. You want it to be developing roots. So if you have a ton of leaves that it needs to keep alive and thriving, it's not going to root as fast. So I would cut this one right here. So that would give me a cutting with 3 leaves, and then I would remove the bottommost leaf. And what that will give me is the exposed growth point from removing that leaf, and then several of these little nubs here. So pothos plants can grow aerial roots to help it cling on to things in nature, and those are also excellent when you are rooting the plants. So that's just a practical example of how I would cut this one to propagate. I do get questions a lot about how I keep my cats away from my plants and which plants are safe to have around pets. Pothos plants are considered mildly toxic if they are ingested. So if you have animals that eat your plants, I would recommend putting them up and out of reach. My cats are old and lazy by this point, and one of them has no teeth and isn't really interested in plants. So I don't worry about it as much as I may have 10 years ago when they were crazy and just like getting into everything. Now, I will say that since pothos plants look so lovely hanging in hanging planters and hanging baskets, it may make sense for you to hang them from the ceiling where your cats may not be able to get to. Just make sure they don't have any sort of surface to land on, like a shelf, because they will find their way up if they are determined to get to a plant. I have some plants I just can't have in the house, like a ponytail palm, because my Henry will make it his life's mission to get to that plant, even if I give him no landing surface, which has resulted in ponytail palms falling on the floor, pots being shattered, dirt going everywhere. So it's just not worth it for me to have certain plants. However, pothos plants are one that I can manage having with my cats. And once your marble queen gets super long, you can start veining it along the walls to create a little bit of a jungle look. Now, I will show you guys the best way I think there is to do this. So I buy these adhesive hook things. They come as squares. I will link them down below. They come as squares, and I cut out the circle part and stick them up on the wall because I find that this is just less intrusive than command hooks will be, and they're easier to manipulate than the little leaf clip thingies that a lot of people use, I think, because you just have to set the vine down into the hook. This is an example of what one of them looks like when I didn't cut it before putting it up. And it is a little bit more noticeable when you don't cut out that circular portion of it. And the vines are so lightweight that I've not had any issues with these being too heavy or falling off or anything. They're actually quite sticky. So this has been a really cool way for me to create this vining look as the vines get longer, and I can create kind of like a little jungle area here. All right, and that wraps up my quick and dirty care guide on the Marble Queen pothos plant. If you guys have any questions about the Marble Queen, drop them below. It's one of my favorites. It's gorgeous, it's easy. Why wouldn't you want to add it to your collection? Until my next video, happy planting.